Well, we heard from House and Senate leaders on the Republican side, and now it is our privilege to hear from House and Senate leaders from the Democratic side in the North Carolina General Assembly. I have the particular privilege of introducing our House representative. He's the Deputy Minority Leader in the North Carolina House of Representatives, Robert Reives. He served in the House since 2014. He represents House District 54, which currently serves constituents in a portion of Durham County and all of Chatham County. Upon entering the General Assembly, he was immediately tapped for leadership, serving as Freshman Caucus co-chair and as treasurer of the North Carolina Legislative Black Caucus. Currently, Robert is still looked to for leadership as he works across party lines in his roles as Deputy Democratic Leader of the House, as Vice Chair of the Education Community Colleges Committee, and as Vice Chair of the Judiciary 3 Committee. His other legislative committee assignments include agriculture, finance, and rules and calendar and operations of the House. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Representative Robert Reives.
And I have this distinct honor
you don't look like Robert.
Introducing Dan Blue. A Robeson County native, Senator Dan Blue has devoted his career in public service to improving education, economic development, workers' rights, access to health care, and retirement security. He earned a degree in mathematics from NC Central University and a Juris Doctorate degree from Duke University School of Law. He'll probably have something to say about that basketball game. In the last 40 years, Dan has served in various capacities in the legislature, including time as House Representatives, of course, as Speaker of the House, then over to the State Senate, and is also Chair of the Judiciary and Appropriations Committees. He's currently the Chairman of the Board of Trustees, on the Board of Trustees at Duke University, and is the past President of the National Conference of State Legislatures. He has also served as the Executive Committee for the Southern Legislative Conference and is a founding member and partner of Blue Stevens Fellers, a law firm in Raleigh, North Carolina. Senator, we welcome you.
Hey, John. Hey, Neil.
Good to see you, sir. Yeah.
Obviously, we expect Representative Reives to come along here in a few minutes, but in the meantime, thank you for being here.
Sure. Happy to be here.
Yep.
Great looking crowd.
I was going to say, you're among home folks here. So we appreciate you being here and wanted to open up the conversation as Senate leader for the Democrats. There's certain particular goals you may have for the 2019 session. And if you wanted to share any of those with our rural leaders here today, we welcome that opportunity for you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank all of you for being here. I've watched the Rural Center since its genesis, I guess, and totally subscribe to what it has sought to do over the last 25 or 30 years. I think in this session of the General Assembly, the most important thing that we can do, for various reasons, but the most important thing that we can do is really take steps to make sure that we are addressing this coverage gap for working people in the state with regard to health insurance. And in North Carolina, it's particularly urgent that we do it because if we were to cover the gap, address it, as 38 other states have, it would mean something on the order of $4.5 billion extra economic activity in the state per year. It would also mean the coverage of thousands and thousands of people, almost 500,000 people, who would have access to health care insurance. It would also save a lot of rural hospitals that are on the brink of failure. One of the things that I've done over the years is I've had some experience in creating healthcare systems as they have basically had to expand and stuff. And so I've noticed and watched very closely over the last 20 years the plight, if you will, of many of our rural hospitals in the state. The greatest immediate help to having these hospitals survive is to expand Medicaid so that we can address this coverage gap for working people. And you're talking about making insurance coverage available for working people. your barbers, your beauticians, your small business people around the state. So that's one of the most urgent things that we could do, not only with respect to saving the lives, but the 40,000 plus jobs that it would create in most areas where there is a small rural hospital. It is the biggest employer in the county, maybe after the school system. And so you'd immediately have an infusion of new jobs in many of these counties, these rural areas. You'd have increased and improved health care, so you'd have a more productive workforce in these rural areas, and you would save countless lives. So that's the most important thing. A second thing that we really have to focus on in this session, especially as it relates to our rural or semi-rural areas, we really do have to seriously address a different form of economic development. I mentioned the Rural Center and the purpose of its creation back in the, I guess, mid-'80s. And we have to get back to, not just the things that we do to encourage small businesses to develop. We have to put the infrastructure in place that will enable development in our more rural areas. 29 counties, almost a third of the counties in this state, are projected to lose population by 2030, and significant population. And I happen to have hailed from a rural county. I represent this area where you assembled right now. I represent downtown and East Raleigh, East Wake County. And so I see the world through two sets of lenses. I see it through the lenses of a rapidly urbanizing Wake County or Mecklenburg County, and yet I see it through the lenses of a struggling rural North Carolina. And we are one state. I happen to see that the people who are really interested in delivering Medicare, closing this coverage gap, mostly are urban legislators. They don't represent the areas that are mostly impacted by expanding Medicaid. But they have an interest because they realize that we're part of this bigger picture. If North Carolina overall does well, then the urban areas that they represent do well. If North Carolina does well, the workers who come from rural areas can stay in their rural areas and be productive and be happy. It does not contribute to the increased traffic and all of those other issues. So all of us have an interest in making sure that we take whatever steps are necessary to have real, meaningful economic development in the rural areas of this state, because we care, but also because it's in the best interest of the rapidly urbanizing major metropolitan areas in the state.
So, Senator, another issue that our audience is quite interested in is access to high speed, to broadband, internet and telephone connectivity. Mm-hmm. Do you see some action, some solutions coming from the General Assembly on that issue?
I do, and they're coming from various different angles. I helped sponsor a bill by the co-ops where they're trying to extend the last mile of broadband using, their existing facilities and resources, joining with local private partners to try to cover the last mile. I tell this story, and I really mean it. I drove a school bus 52 miles a day when I was a 16-year-old in high school. About 2 hours, hour and a half in the morning, hour and a half in the afternoon. Maybe kids aren't taking those kind of long trips, but still kids in rural areas and in urban areas, but rural areas particularly, are still taking those long trips. And I often imagine what it would have been like had there been broadband that was available to me riding the school bus early in the morning when I hadn't finished my homework the night before. And if
surely
in fact,
that never happened. That's just
happened more often than you realize. But if in fact that's the case, this kid is on a bus an hour and a half. Of course, they talk, they text, I guess, if they still got the capacity to do that. But imagine what additional study time, or just exploring computers and stuff, would do to kids all over rural North Carolina if they spent, of the 2 hours that they're on a school bus, just an hour of it connecting with the world, learning new stuff, following up what their teachers tried to teach them during the course of the day if they didn't quite get it to register. it makes sense. And if you don't have it, these kids, if that's an hour a day, that's 5 hours a week, that's a whole school day. So in the course of a school year, they're behind 36 days because they're doing it. And so there's so many ways that we could really contribute mightily in expanding broadband. I think about the instances in this state where we've really made great leaps forward. It was expensive when Carl Scott decided in the 40s that you needed to get roads to the rural farmers so that they could get their products to the market. And he had to fight the status quo to get that done. But he built all of these farm-to-market roads, and consequently we connected rural North Carolina, along with the efforts with the REA and the various other rural electric co-op initiatives. We basically were able to see a different kind of North Carolina from an economic standpoint because somebody, Luther Hodges, was willing to do something different as we created the Research Triangle Park. Or with education. I mean, North Carolina hadn't always been aspiring to be the top in education in the region. With the efforts of Terry Sanford, you've got to go out on a limb and do something different if you really want to make a difference. And if we're going to make a difference in getting broadband to rural North Carolina, we got to do something different than talk about it. We got to be willing to make bold new investments. Now, we can make those in multiple ways. The state itself can become a greater player. I've advocated, and I still do, that there are ways that we can single out rural North Carolina to give it resources, give inspiration for the resources, of course, but give it resources to start closing some of these gaps we have. I advocated, we came with the final repeal, or the final stage of reducing the corporate income tax, by the way, which is paid mostly by people in urban areas, for the most part. But trying to figure out that we postponed the final 0.25% of that and dedicate those resources specifically to development in rural North Carolina. That would have been a revenue stream of $110, $120 million a year, specifically aimed at our rural counties and rural areas. Nobody else sort of built a strong box around it. Nobody else could bother it and use it for a dedicated amount of time to cover some of these issues that we are talking about repeatedly. I sponsored the low wealth school formula. My schools aren't low wealth in Wake County, but because I understand, and I think we understand from urban areas, that if in fact you're going to look at taking resources away from urban areas, whether it's sales tax or anything else, you weaken everybody and don't strengthen anybody. And so we have to be willing to put the resources to bear, not that you throw money at it, but put the resources to bear to fix identifiable problems. And one of those is a lack of broadband, because that affects rural areas' ability to grow small businesses and to do commerce and to fully develop. So that's what I see us doing. There is some meaningful discussion in this session so far. There are 3 or 4 bills that have been introduced. The counties and cities are getting involved in it to some degree, and I support all of those measures.
Okay. Here he is. Let's welcome Representative Reives.
Hey, man.
How are you? Well, you just walked in on broadband.
Yes.
We heard from Senator Blue. I know the House has working on some of this as well.
Yes.
Is there anything that you'd like to add to that part of the conversation to empower rural areas through deployment of broadband?
Well, man, I think he did a pretty darn good job.
He was on a roll.
But first, hello, everybody. But I would say that the House is working on the same issue. I feel the same as Senator Blue. I just hope something happens. It's something that everybody knows we need. It's something that if you put it out in front of both caucuses right now and put it on the floor for a vote, it would pass unanimously to get this done. But we've got to stop talking about it. We've got to do it. We're getting farther and farther behind when you look at how we're competing with other states. I was talking the other day with some people, and I was saying, the thing we always got to remember is we're not just trying to beat South Carolina or Tennessee or Virginia now. We're having to compete with countries all across the world. And broadband is basically a utility at this point. This isn't something that you can choose to have. It's not something that people are doing so they can download a couple of more movies on Netflix. We've got to have it. We've got to have it for schools. We've got to have it for economic development. You can't continue to ask companies to come here and invest in us if we're not willing to invest in our rural areas.
Okay.
So we've heard a lot during this conversation with Dan and now with you, and in our previous conversation about divides. We've heard reference to the rural-urban divide. We've heard a lot of talk recently about our political divides, the divides between the North Carolina House and Senate that occurs just institutionally, the partisan divides. Can you both talk to us a little bit about opportunities for moving forward on an issue or two, initiative of some kind, particularly one that is providing opportunity for our rural communities, that you believe there is a significant chance to get some bipartisan cross-chamber cooperation on? And how do you go about finding those commonalities? We heard in our previous session about there are, of course, clear political, philosophical differences, perhaps clearer than they have been in previous generations between the two parties in a philosophical sense. So there's some things you're not going to agree on. Presumably, though, there are also some overlaps and some common denominators. So how do you get to those, and what would be an example of something like that?
You want to go?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay, there are always divides, John, and I think that's true, but I think that we make a big deal out of rural-urban divides, a much bigger deal than really exists. It's a question of resources and the ability to address problems. And we have to be willing to look collectively on addressing broad problems. Some might be unique to a specific area, urban areas that have problems as well, and some may be unique to rural or suburban areas. The whole magic behind the organization of government in the United States and consequently even in North Carolina is this whole idea of divided government that makes it necessary to have compromise. So if you enter into a situation where you think that it's either my way or the highway, then you're going to create divides because people aren't getting involved to make this system of compromise work. I mean, that is the magic that has sustained the United States for 240 years. That is the magic that's made North Carolina go forth. I think that the opportunity to have a greater dialogue across philosophical lines, and there's many philosophical divides among parties as there are between separate parties, among members of the party as there are between the separate parties. But now that you have a third party engaging in the conversation as our Constitution contemplated, you get the governor who can take a global view, a much broader view, not so much locked into one political silo versus another, who can enter the fray and talk about his ideas. And you get the Republicans versus the Democrats in the House or Senate. And as long as he's got the discipline to make folk come together to talk about places that we have problems, then you can make people start giving a little to get a little, and then come back another day and get the rest of it, of whatever it is you want. So I think that is something that enables us to address this perceived divide. As the governor has advocated the Medicaid adoption, that 90+% of is paid for by the federal government, that we've already paid the taxes for. I think that you see a lot of the pressure coming off of urban legislators where they're saying, okay, we'll grab stuff from the urban legislators that they'd normally get for their counties or from their constituents, and we'll take it to rural counties, because I think it'll be a much more balanced approach. If you want that, I need to do this. And government works better when it's that kind of outline, I think. So that's where I see the great opportunity in this session of the General Assembly, as we start assembling a budget, knowing that it's not going to be one way or the other, but everybody at the end, maybe not in the beginning, but at the end, everybody is going to have some role to play in it, because you won't get anything done if everybody doesn't play in it.
And I would agree, just going from that same viewpoint, I think the biggest problem that you see with all the divides right now is the inability to respect somebody else's opinion. And I know that sounds basic, but I think if you walk into a situation and you say automatically, because of the letter behind your name, because of where you're from or something like that, that you don't have something to give me on an issue, then I think that's what's causing our huge divides, because it's hard to have a conversation with someone when you know that that person doesn't believe you have a point, doesn't believe you have an opinion that should be respected. I think we've got plenty of areas that we agree on when you sit and talk to people, and my experience when I compare 14 when I came in to now, there's some things that I see that are a lot better. There's some things that have gotten worse. I remember when I got in 14, I mean, there were Republicans and Democrats who were just going to talk these issues out. So the issues we could agree on that we need to do something about, education, health care, broadband, things of that sort, they knew that discussion was going to happen because they were in a mode at that time still of thinking, we've got to talk to each other to get something meaningful passed. What I hope the governor's global view helps us do is to realize now that we've got to talk to each other to really get something meaningful passed. And it's not always about philosophy. It's not always about, well, there are certain things that we'll disagree on, because again, when you talk to members, especially the freshman members on both sides that have come in this year, when you sit in a group with them being Republicans, Democrats, whoever, it is amazing how much they agree on when they're allowed just to sit and talk before other influences come in to tell them, well, you're not supposed to be agreeing on these things. And so, I mean, we've got opportunities abound that allow us to work on some issues, but we've got to allow ourselves to work on those issues.
Representative, how large in your mind is that rural-urban gap? Senator Blue addressed his view about that. Is it a yawning gap? Is it not as large as it appears?
I don't think
you
it's
have a
as
foot in
large.
both of those camps.
Yeah, and I do. With Chatham and Durham, I actually have an opportunity to see both, and I really don't think the gap is as large as you would see. I think, again, like Senator Blue said, it's an issue of resources, and where best put those resources. And the problem is that you've got to make decisions sometimes between, do we put this particular resource in a rural area as opposed to an urban area, where you're going to get your most bang for your buck. And I think what has really developed is it's less about the divide and more about a real philosophy about dispensing resources and about investing in areas where you don't have immediate, obvious numbers that show return. And I think that's what's happened with a lot of our rural areas. It's less that you have urban legislators that don't want to help. It's more about, frankly, leadership making a decision. Look, I can't look over here at the western part of Chatham County and tell you that when we invest this money that we're going to get this back in 5 years. I know that if I put this money in Raleigh, what's going to happen? What you've got to do is go on a hope and belief that if I invest here, that it's going to be better for everybody. Because the one thing that, in my opinion, urban legislators understand, Raleigh, for instance, does better if Chatham's doing better, if Orange is doing better, if the surrounding counties are doing better, then that's that much more that helps out Raleigh. Charlotte understands if Union County is growing, if Gaston is growing, that we're going to do that much better as a city, because they understand they can't keep all that growth right there. But it's a matter of us deciding to invest resources, and I think sometimes we've been afraid to take a leap of faith to invest resources in places that sorely needed.
Okay. Small business has been an economic pillar for rural North Carolina since really the beginnings. And entrepreneurship, innovation, and support of small business is certainly something that can help lift up Person County or Western Chatham County, so we're not having a reallocation of resources. What's your thoughts, both with the Senate and the House, on anything moving forward in 2019 that's going to support the development and continuation of small business in North Carolina? Many of the folks here are small business owners and or work for small businesses in North Carolina.
And a substantial part of the economy is driven by small business,
Correct.
much more so than big business as we used to know them. And the emphasis is on developing small businesses rather than buffalo hunting, trying to go get a big industry in. I really now still believe that one of the greatest things that we could do for small businesses across the state, not just in rural North Carolina, is on this healthcare access. Exactly. I talked about the dollars involved. $4.5 billion is a lot of additional economic activity. Small businesses will be able to have their employees covered by insurance. That will keep them from running off somewhere else, in most instances, to get jobs. As I said, in a typical rural county, say Robeson County, 500 new jobs. There hasn't been an announcement of 500 new jobs in Robeson County since I was a little boy. That might have been yesterday, but it was a few yesterdays ago. But immediately to do that, and imagine the small businesses that supports, because not only are you getting the health-related industries, you're getting the heating and air guys, you're getting everybody associated with small businesses in North Carolina. That would be the number one impetus. We can still be very creative with some of the tax policies in various areas, so that there's a different treatment of revenue and income of small businesses in different places if we put the right kind of zone nomenclature on them. So there are many creative ways that we can go about doing it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel to come up with ways to be creative. We just need to look at some of the stuff that we've done in the past, and there was a reason for doing it that way. And go back and start encouraging some of the same activity again. I mentioned that the greatest thing that we can do is make sure that the resources are available. If it's a priority, you're usually going to find the resources associated with it. We've adapted to it, but we've cut $3.5 billion annually out of the state's revenue stream. And that has a negative impact. We need to be able to dedicate specific streams of money to getting the kinds of teachers that we need in rural areas, because that too encourages the development of certain kinds of small businesses. Again, there is just an abundance of things that we can do, but we have to basically do something other than say that we all agree that we need to do something about small businesses.
Okay. Representative?
And I would echo a lot of those sentiments. I run a small business, and I can tell you, running a small business, those are the issues that you run across, healthcare being number one. The first thing I remember when we were first starting to really get into the healthcare discussion back in 08 and 09, and what that difference meant to people who worked in my office. I remember then as that started to move along and you start to have more realities set in about how healthcare was going to be handled and how North Carolina was choosing to handle healthcare, I remember one person, an employee in particular, who did not want to leave, but they had an opportunity to get into a job with the state that would give them an opportunity to have good health care because they fell into a gap. And it was just that simple. And so if you want to help small businesses grow, help them with things that we can help them with. Healthcare is number one. Number two, education. I mean, how many people make decisions, especially when you're in small areas, about where you're going to live based on the school system that's around? Support your rural school systems. Why not put some money into public education? I think what gets lost sometimes in the education debate is we talk about all these opportunities that we can present to people in the future without addressing the opportunities they've got to take advantage of right now. So if I talk to a person and I'm trying to get them to work at my particular business, talking to them about something that's going to happen 4 or 5 years down the road doesn't really have the same relevance to them, because their position is my kid will be in another school by that time. I need to know where my child's going next year and what resources you're investing in that there. And again, with rural areas, they don't have the same monies to invest. They don't have the same property tax revenue to invest. And so that's where, at those times, the state's got to step in and provide that opportunity. But again, we've got to recognize that rural areas do have particular challenges, that small businesses, again, are going to be our lifeblood. You can get all the buffalo you want in here. The bottom line is that this state, with the way it's put together, with the way our opportunities are, is going to be built based on how these small businesses thrive and develop. And when you think about how many small businesses here in North Carolina became big businesses, became businesses that people want to have something to do with, you can't help but wonder why we don't invest more in these rural areas to have that. Because the bottom line is you living in Raleigh doesn't mean that you're going to be the next Bill Gates. Next Bill Gates could be anywhere. The next Jeff Bezos could be anywhere. But if we're not giving those people opportunities, then what are we doing?
So we've talked about small business, economic development, and healthcare access, broadband, education, a variety of topics. Our audience here have many of them have very strong opinions about these. What's the best way for them to engage with you and share their views and their priorities with you?
I know with me, just do something. Email, call, come by. I think the thing that's been funny to me about being in the legislature is I think the expectation was that you would just be overwhelmed with people wanting to weigh in. And what you realize...
Be careful what you ask for.
Look, I like it. I enjoy it. I remember even recently, I had a very good friend of mine who was in the, who some would say is on my side of the aisle, if you want to put it that way. And we were having a discussion about an issue regarding redistricting. And to listen to his viewpoints and why he had those viewpoints actually became a really fascinating conversation. And we talked for a while and actually changed my opinion about how to address some of the issues that we have with redistricting. And that happens all the time. But people have to be willing to engage. But as you say, with being careful what you ask for, when I say engage, engagement means dialogue. I can't speak for Senator Blue. I can just tell you it's kind of hard for me to listen to a monologue when somebody says, what's your opinion on this? And then they give me a 30-minute monologue and they'll say, well, I don't want to hear it. I'm getting ready to walk to the next legislator. Have an engaged discussion and be okay with disagreement. The very best ideas in the history of this country came from two people having a disagreement about how to approach a problem and having to find a way to compromise.
And let me add this, because Robert is absolutely right. I have sort of a pecking order in my legislative office, and it carries over to my law office since it's only 2 blocks from my legislative office. That is, my constituency trumps everybody else. When there's something that they want to talk about, unless it's something that I can't extricate myself from. If I'm in a meeting with the governor, I probably won't interrupt it to take the call. But all of my numbers, as well as yours, are public numbers. Residential, law office, legislative, easily accessible. Now, I know that that's an old way of communicating, but also email access or whatever, all of the social media. But I don't read the social media for the most part because it's so voluminous that I can't. But anybody is invited and welcomed. First, my constituency. Secondly, North Carolinians, regular citizens, are in that priority. Then I talk to my colleagues in the General Assembly. Then with people from agencies or official bodies who have something to tell me. And lastly, from the people who make it a career to be down there to convince me to do something one way or the other, the lobbyists. That's the rank order in which we review stuff. I do, at least. So if you have something on your mind, take your individual legislators and talk to them, as Robert said. Give them a call. If they don't respond to that, stop by and see them. And as you get close to election cycles, they're very happy to see you. But let them know what's on your mind, that you're thinking about this as well. And make cogent, tight, short arguments to them and follow up on those arguments. And say, I think that this could help us in so many different ways. Talk to all of them. I don't care whether they're Democrat, Republican, unaffiliated, rural, urban, or in between. You need to talk to them and constantly remind them before election time of what's important and what will improve the quality of life for the lives of the people where you come from, and how it will make job creation, education, and all of these things more readily available to everybody.
Well,
And
thank you.
If I could just add
Sure.
just that one last thing. The other thing to do, don't assume what anybody believes or thinks. I think that adds to a lot of the problems that you see in politics right now is don't walk in and believe that you can look at a person and know what their beliefs will be about an issue. Because generally you're going to be surprised. Not necessarily pleasantly surprised, but you're going to be surprised. And so if you walk in with that attitude, I think it makes for a much better dialogue. But it's just really, it's tough when somebody comes in to tell you what you believe about something that you've never voiced an opinion about, and then say they want to have a dialogue. Go in with an open mind, make your legislators have an open mind, and I think that really gets you where you're trying to get to when you're having these conversations.
So in summary, Snapchat. That's really what you
Is that
want.
the one you use? Okay.
Just want Snapchat.
Well, those are really salient points. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your public service. Senator Blue, long public service, and thank you for your leadership. Please, if everybody can extend a warm thank you to our legislators that are with us today.